The main thing that we wanted to talk about today is just a way to shift into healthier mindsets as a leader. So often we find ourselves stuck, or perhaps we're grappling with a particular problem, or perhaps we just need new insights or new ways to think about a problem, or especially how to deal with people. Could be people that we influence up or down or across the organization. And so, one of the things that Mike and I really focus on is helping people become healthier leaders and to adapt the right kind of mindset to lead in their job. So we're just going to talk about three different tools today that you can use. We use a variety of these. They're very visual tools. They're simple. They're not thick binders or large books that you have to read. They're really simple visual tools. In fact, you can download those. There's a link in the chat. You can download the workbook, and you have those for your benefit. Or if you just want to take screenshots today, you can do that as well.
So the first one that we're going to have here is called Maximizing Team Performance. And if you'll notice, this looks a bit like a flywheel, and that's on purpose. So within a team or an organization, this huge flywheel is trying to turn. And if any one of these 5 components is off in some way, it's going to slow down that flywheel. So many times in organizations that we've worked with in the past, the leaders say, you know what, we just got to execute better. You know what, next month, this team's got to execute better, or we need more capacity. Now, that may be true. We need additional headcount and resources, but many times our capacity suffers because of the fact that we're not executing well for some reason. Now, what we advocate for is to move back up around that flywheel. So many times the teams aren't executing well because they're not aligned. They're either not aligned on who's doing what, they're not aligned on what success looks like, they're not aligned on what their goals are. So if you don't have that, you're not going to be rowing in the same direction, the right direction for your execution. But even going back further than alignment, what we've seen is if we don't have a good relationship, then we're probably not going to be aligned. If we don't have a good working relationship in which I trust you, which I know you've got my back, then I'm probably not going to go and have those difficult conversations with you. If I'm not having those conversations and I just do it myself, then our alignment's going to suffer because we don't have a good relationship of trust. What builds on that relationship is the first thing that we're going to talk about today, and that's communication. Communication is at the heart of everything, whether it's our personal relationships or our business relationships. So think about this. If we don't know how to communicate with each other because I have a different perspective or different point of view, it's probably going to hurt our relationship. It's also going to hurt that word that Micah touched on is the word trust. Trust at a lot of levels. Trust that you've got my back. Trust that you know what you're doing. Trust that you're on the same page as me. So many organizations, many leaders jump to execution and capacity, but where we start is at the top of this wheel in communication. So we're going to talk a little bit about communication as it relates to voices. So that's a word that we use quite a bit. So if you think of voices, we all have different voices. I have a quieter voice. Mike has a little bit louder voice, not just in volume, but in intensity. So we're going to go really quickly through what we utilize as the 5 voices. And these 5 voices that you're going to see here, these 5 voices are actually based in Myers-Briggs psychology. Okay, so these are not things that we made up or Giant, which is the platform that we utilize, but these 5 voices are rooted in the 16 different personality types of Myers-Briggs. So I'm going to go through these and tell a little bit about each one of these. We're very complex beings, right? So we're not one of these all the time. We're a mixture of all these different voices. So the very first one is what we call the quietest voice. And this is the nurturer. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's actually my first foundational voice, but the nurturer is all about people. They're all about relationships. They're all about harmony. And they have a tremendous focus on their personal values. They're going to be quiet because many times they don't value what they bring to the table. So take a look at this at the bottom there. Almost half of the population, this is based on Myers-Briggs data, has that quieter voice. Also, that nurturer is very, very present day focused. Okay, so moving to the right is the next quietest voice, and that's creative. So as I'm going through these, think about yourself and also think about other people that you work with as well. Sometimes it's stickier if you can think about others. So that creative voice as a leadership voice is all about the future. They're all about thinking about creative ideas, future ideas. How can we make it better? How can we innovate this widget to work better? Strangely enough, and when we were learning this, the idea of organizational integrity is very strong and rooted in that creative voice. So they're always thinking about the future, but look at the population. It's about 9% of the population or an organization has that creative voice. The reason that that's one of the quieter voices is because many times what comes out of their mouth, you're going, well, where in the world did that come from? Well, where it came from is Sally said something, then Jenny mentioned something, then it's an article that I read last week, then it's something I saw on PBS or an article I read in the magazine. They're putting together all these pieces, and what comes out of their mouth is the result of that. So what they have to be able to do is to build a bridge to some of the other voices and say, here's how I got there. So again, very future-oriented voice. Next is the guardian voice. It's right in the middle because you're going to hear from them because they're going to have a desire to ask their questions. So that guardian voice that's on your team, and it may be you, that guardian voice is all about due diligence. They're all about the resources that our organization or our company has and making sure that we use them properly. They're also about efficiency. They're also about making sure things run effectively and properly. So one of the things that we say about that guardian voice is that they can be right and wrong all at the same time. Like they can ask a question in such a way that's almost interrogation. So they have to be very careful about their questioning. So for them, it's about 30% of the population. They're very present day oriented. They want to honor how we got here. You know what? Our company is 50 years old. We don't want to just go off in a new direction that those creatives want to take us. So we're always talking about what today looks like. So we're 3 voices in, and can you already see how some of these there can be friction? So if that creative voice is always thinking about the future, the guardian's always thinking about today. So next voice is the connector voice. You're usually going to hear from them because they want to share what's going on in their life and their businesses and the relationships that they have. So they're all about the relational network. The connector is the person that you say, I got a guy for that, right? Oh, you know what? I've got somebody that I can connect you with. Let me do an email introduction for you guys. So they're all about collaboration, not only within the organization, but outside the organization. So this can be very important for companies to grow because they're going to be able to identify other businesses, other people that you can be connected with in some way. So again, think about that there. 11% of the population, they're also extremely future oriented. Okay. Just like the nurturer, the connector does not do well giving or receiving constructive feedback. I have a big problem with that. And my first 2 voices are nurturer, connector. So finally, it's what we call the warm and cuddly pioneer. So you'll notice on the volume indicator there, it's red. It goes all the way to 11. So the pioneer is not only loud sometimes in volume, but also intensity. So that pioneer voice within your organization is the one that's all about the strategic vision. They're all about shaping the future. So when that pioneer goes to envision a building, they don't just think about the building. They think about the block. They think about the city. So they're all about how do I put all the pieces together to bring my vision to fruition. Sometimes what we call an immature or unhealthy pioneer, they can actually shut people down because if they're unhealthy, they're only thinking about themselves many times. One interesting thing, and we've done this workshop many times, and for the pioneers in the room, we ask the question, do you like to solve problems? And it's a resounding, oh my gosh, yes. Bring us problems all day long and we want to solve them. So again, the pioneer voice is very future oriented. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you is how do these voices work together? So if you look at this, we've plotted each one of those 5 voices. Oh, I forgot to tell you, You're a mixture of all of those. You can go in and out of those voices as needed, but the key is what is most resounding to you? What is most natural to you? So for me, what's most natural is the nurturer voice. For Micah, it's the creative. Micah has 20 new ideas by 10 o'clock every day, right? But you can start to see how there's some friction. So take a look at this 2x2. So on the vertical axis, this is how people make decisions. At the top, the voices that you see at the top of this graph, they're all about people and values. How is it going to impact our staff? How is it going to impact them? Is that really going to be in accordance with the values that we've set for our organization and for our company? All right, so that's the top half. The bottom half, how they make decisions, is based on systems and logic, right? Not so much about the people necessarily, right? Sometimes they can put the people aside and only look at what's logical. If you look at the left side of that vertical, they process based on looking at today. They're very present focused. So that's the nurture and guardian voices. On the other side, on the right side, those are the voices that are always looking into the future, right? So they're always thinking about what could be. And future for them could be 5 years, could be 10 years, could be 15 years down the road. The friction that could start to take place between that is you have one voice, the creative voice is, what about the future? And the guardian says, well, what about today? What about the future? What about today? The guardian says, well, there will be no future if we don't get this figured out today. So what you see there, the dotted lines, that's what we call the nemesis voice. Those are the voices that naturally I have a tough time hearing and working with and relating to. So the nurturer voice, their nemesis voice, is the pioneer and what we call the creative pioneer. So ironically, I actually did this calculation today. We've known each other for 47 years. Our voice orders are the exact opposite. So he is a creative pioneer and I'm a nurturer. But we trust each other, we respect each other, and we value, that's the important word, we value what the other person brings to the table. So last example here, when you think about this, if you think about somebody that has a guardian voice, they're all about logic, about systems, about today. When they're talking to the connector or the creative connector, it's a big disconnect. The connector's like, I don't even want to go talk to Sally. You know, she's just going to have a ton of questions and she's going to shut me down. So we talk about this mind shift change is how do we learn to value, truly value all those voices that we have around our table?
Yeah, so you can take the assessment if you haven't already. You can take that. It's a free assessment. You just pop in your email. There's no charge, no credit card, anything like that. And then if you want to reach out to us via email, we can give you a more full report on your total voice order. When you take the free assessment, it'll give you your first 2 or 3, but we can peek behind the scenes and give you more information around that. The second little shift that we want people to make is to be aware of your tendencies. And this is just what we say is growing in self-awareness. And the way that we share this tool is to understand that this infinity symbol here in the middle is all about understanding that you never graduate from the school of self-awareness. Like you're on a lifelong journey of self-awareness. Why is that? Because you are growing, you are changing, the environment around you is changing, people around you are changing. And so we are always on this journey of learning more about ourselves, who we are, the way that we're wired, what we've learned, how we've grown, and then how we need to adapt in different situations and different phases and points of our life. So I'll just go through this real quick. There's a lot more to this than I will share today, but the way this works is we all have tendencies. We have positive tendencies and we have negative tendencies. Over time, we start to become more aware of those for good or for bad. And these tendencies, once we recognize that those tendencies are there, we start to understand that we're taking actions based on those tendencies. And when we take action that's based in these tendencies, we start to get consequences for these actions. Those consequences start to create a reality for ourselves over time. Especially when I take these actions over time repeatedly, I start to create patterns in my life. And when I create patterns in my life, I'm going to start to create a reality, sometimes without even knowing it. I've talked to people and coached people before that share with me this reality that they're in. And what I will do is I'll work backwards and say, okay, well, the reality is that no one invites you to the meetings anymore. No one wants to collaborate with you. Let's find out why that is. Well, you know what? People stopped inviting me to the meetings. Well, why did they stop inviting you to the meetings? Well, I guess, it's because sometimes I need to share all my ideas, and sometimes I cut people off in conversation. Okay, so why are you cutting people off in conversation? Well, my tendency is to think my idea is better than everybody else's. And so what happens is if I have this tendency in my life, it leads to actions, to consequences, and creates this new reality. So what we encourage leaders to do is as you recognize a consequence that you're getting that you don't want, to look back and say, what action did I take that I got this consequence for my team or from the people around me? Once I understand the action I'm taking, I can say, okay, where is that rooted? What's the tendency in my life? What's the tendency in my thinking that has led me to this point where I take that kind of action? And then it becomes incumbent upon you to choose a different action. You have to choose to do something that's going to break that pattern in your life. I know for me, I kind of keep a running list of the tendencies I've recognized in my life. And one of those, because of the creative voice and because creative is my first voice, often I construct an idea in my head and I see it playing out perfectly. Okay. And because I see the idea so clearly in my head, I start to think about how it's going to look and exactly down to the final detail and the timing and all of that. And I can create this perfect idea in my mind. Now, what happens is I start to execute that. If it doesn't come out exactly like I want it to, if it's not perfect, there are some perfectionist tendencies in there. Because of that, I can start to get really frustrated, or I can try to back up and redo the idea or pull the idea away because I want the idea to be executed in my mind the way it was supposed to. So therefore, when I pull away or when I get really stressed or frustrated, I can become short with people or try to correct or overcorrect sometimes. The reality is that people don't want to execute ideas with me. They're like, he has this perfect image in his mind. It'll never be perfect. So just let it go. I remember one time I was doing a large outdoor production. I was the production designer and director for this large outdoor event that we were doing for our community. It was a 5-night event. It was 300 people in the cast, and it was thousands of people who had kind of come through this outdoor production. And I just remember in my mind, I always had a view of what it looked like to perfectly do this production. And so at the end of every night, I would have this punch list and I would tell all the actors and production assistants, okay, so here's what we did wrong tonight, and here's what we did really well. And tomorrow night, we got to correct this. And so I'd always go through this punch list, kind of continuous improvement in my mind to try to make the experience perfect for our audience. This one particular night, it went really, really well. It wasn't quite perfect, but it was really, really well. And so I remember talking to a couple of my production assistants before the final meeting for the night. And as I was talking to them, they said, man, tonight just went perfect, don't you think? And I thought, okay, so other people saw it as perfect, but I didn't. And so I checked myself. I said, yeah, it went really, really well tonight. And I remember that evening, I just took my list, folded it up, I put it in my pocket. I gathered all the cast around and I said, you know what? Tonight was just about perfect. And so I don't even have a list tonight. You guys did such a great job. Go home, get some rest, and be back tomorrow night. People started applauding. They were so happy. It was painful for me because like it's hard for me to say it was good enough. Like those are two hard words for me to say. But I realized the people around me, they needed that. The team needed that. And so that was just a way to celebrate how well they had done. And it was also a kind of a checkpoint for me to know that my tendency is I want it to be perfect, and yet sometimes it can't be perfect. So knowing this about yourself, when you start to know and recognize your tendencies, then you can start to take new actions and to correct actions so that you really can have better influence with the people around you and on your team. The last one that we'll go through is just talking about the atmosphere that you're creating for your team to make sure it's a healthy atmosphere, an atmosphere where people flourish and grow and become better versions of themselves. We all know that every organization, every team has a culture, but within those organizations and teams, often there are what develops is called subcultures. So within a larger organization, you have these mid-level leaders and even lower frontline leaders who are creating cultures of their own. You notice here these have like little scores on them, and you have different color codings. The higher the score, the healthier the leader. The lower the score, the more unhealthy that leader is. And so we may have a leader at the very top who's kind of scoring average in their health, but you could have other leaders within the organization that are very healthy and creating totally different cultures within their teams. Or you could have a very unhealthy leader who's exerting some negative influence. And then you also notice there's influence that goes across the organization as well. There are people in these front lines here, these people who are entry-level workers or those who don't have management leadership responsibilities. They're still influencing other people. They're still exerting influence. And so it's incumbent upon us as leaders to understand that there can be subcultures that develop inside the organization. And we want to always be sure that the culture is healthy, that the atmosphere is healthy for people, not just at the very top and not even at these middle levels, but the influence that gets exerted all throughout the organization. One of the tools that we found that is most helpful, and I love teaching this tool because I've seen it change CEOs and presidents and mid-level managers and parents and spouses like this one. It just really resonates with people because it's so simple and so easy to use. There are two dimensions here. One is support and one is challenge. Really good leaders know how to support the people around them, but they also know how to give them the right challenge. Okay. And the more specific these are and the more timely, the better. We always want to strive to be a liberating leader, someone that really sets people free to do the very best work that they can, where we help them grow into somebody that they'd even realize that they could be, that they reach their potential, that they're doing incredible work. We really want to empower the people around us. That's what good leaders do. I've worked for leaders in the past that really pushed me, but at the same time, they supported me and helped me become a better person because of it. High support. What does support look like? Support is making sure that the people on my team have the resources, they have my time, they get good advice from me, they get good counsel, they get good questions, that the organization is supporting them, the team is supporting them, that they're heard. That's what the things of support look like. What does challenge look like? A challenge looks like I'm setting goals, I'm setting deadlines, working to make sure that they know what that future objective is, what the future vision is, and that we're putting some sort of boundaries around that, whether it be time boundaries or metrics or a dollar amount or a percentage amount. Like there has to be a challenge to put in front of people so that they know what a win looks like, what it means to win. Now, the problem is often we slide out of one dimension into the other, depending on the situation or depending on the person that we're leading or depending on our voice, our foundational voice. Some of these may be harder for us. If I'm offering support to people, but I'm not challenging them, I create a culture of protection. This is where entitlement starts to take place. I'm giving them lots of support, but I'm not giving them challenge. Oddly enough, mistrust starts to come in. And, when I think about this, I think about leaders who have offered really good support, but they didn't really give me any direction at all. And then it starts to make me second guess the way that they're leading, or maybe perhaps, am I doing a good enough job, or am I really headed in the right direction? Because if they're not challenging me, maybe they don't care about me. Maybe they've got their own agenda at play. Maybe they're busy doing their own thing. They don't care about the direction that I'm going. And so oddly enough, mistrust comes in here. Entitlement is easy to see because, if you don't challenge me for 6 months and suddenly you come in here and give me a deadline by Friday, then there's this sense of entitlement that starts to happen where I say, well, why are you challenging me now? Like you haven't challenged me in the last 6 months. Why now? On the opposite side of that is a leader who dominates, always giving high challenge, always giving me deadlines or high goals, or it's got to improve by 12%, or it's got to come in 10% faster or 20% below budget. And then when I ask for support, they would, no, you just figure it out for yourself. I don't have time. Okay, so if there's no support, but all of this challenge that comes my way, that creates this culture of fear and manipulation. It feels like I'm being coerced into doing my job. It feels like I'm being threatened into doing my job. And this comes across in some very subtle ways too. It doesn't have to be very overt, but people start to feel like this when there's no support or very low support and there's lots of challenge. I know often people say, well, if I'm a brand new leader, if I've got a brand new team, which should I start with? We always say start first with support. Let people know that you're for them, before you start to give them the challenge. Other people I've heard say before, well, you got to go in there and let them know who's in control, and you got to make changes quickly and pull the Band-Aid off, and whatever it may be. They say lead with the challenge. Actually, that sets yourself up against people. The last one over here is abdicate. If there's no challenge and there's no support, this is a leader who's abdicated from their role. They've just pulled away for whatever reason it may be. We often see this when somebody's close to quitting that job, or perhaps they're close to retirement, and they just abdicate their role. They stop supporting, they stop challenging, and what develops is a culture of apathy. Because if my leader doesn't care, why should I care? If they're not willing to exert, the energy to support and to challenge me, why should I exert any support or challenge to my team? And so this really creates some really low expectations within a team. I've had somebody we work with at an interior design firm, and had about 30, he's probably been in business about 30 plus years. He said, if I'd learned this 20 years ago, it made a huge difference in my career. He actually took this particular tool. He learned it in the morning. He had a tough conversation coming up that afternoon with someone on his team. And he actually just took and printed out this sheet. He put it on his table. So as he's having this conversation, he started to offer support within the conversation, and to let the person know that he's for them and he has provided all these resources. However, there are some new things that have to start happening. There's some new behaviors that had to start taking place for this staff member. And so he then offered the challenge. By offering the support and the challenge, he said it totally changed the conversation that he had with this person, that it gave him the tools, it gave him the confidence to say, you know what, I know what it takes to lead this person well. That is to offer support, and yet at the same time, to give them the challenge that they needed in that moment to correct their behavior. I have another client we just worked with just recently, had an employee that had really kind of taken a turn for the worse over 4, 5, 6 months, and there really had to be kind of a moment to reset it. And because this leader who needed the push, she had actually gone through the training. She knew the language. Her leader also knew the language. And so when they came into the conversation, they immediately had this common language. And because of that common language, it changed the conversation to the point where the employee that was struggling, she actually said, you know what, I have not challenged myself enough. I realize that I have slipped. And so thank you for the challenge. It created this common language, which when you can do that across a team, it enhances relationships, it enhances alignment, and it really starts to create some new dynamics in the team where everybody has the same language. Everybody knows what each other's talking about. When you define the terms, when you define the language better, then it creates efficiencies across the entire organization. On our website, there's a way that you can sign up. You can download this. It has an instruction guide with it, the tool, and actually has a worksheet. We often use this one as well as the Know Yourself to Lead Yourself as ways to have conversations with employee check-ins. We train leaders to sit down with the person that they're having the check-in and say, hey, what are some tendencies you've noticed in yourself? What are some ways that you can start to change or to correct those actions that you're taking? Or perhaps to sit down with this and say, hey, what can I do best as a leader to support you right now? What sort of support do you need from me? And it creates this dialogue. Okay, so here's a challenge. We have to get this done by next Friday at 5 p.m. That's the challenge that's ahead of us. How can we navigate this? What do you need from me? And how can I support you to make sure this happens? It creates this dialogue where both things are happening, where support is happening as well as challenge. And also, if you check out our website, there are some options here how we go a lot deeper into some of these concepts. There's about 65 different tools that we teach to leaders and to help them frame their mindset, how to have better conversations, how to calibrate their leadership, and really kind of understanding the journey first. We look inside and say, okay, what's going on inside of me? What needs to change? What am I aware of? What do I need to be more aware of that could be undermining my influence? And so we'll kind of start there in the first section of the 100X training. And then from there, move into really how is it I build relationships and start to develop and lead the people around me. So really understanding what that looks like and understanding what it takes to lead another person while also doing my job is kind of the art of the leader. right? It's not like the only job I have is to develop people around me. I'm also to do my job, and I'm responsible for projects and lots of other things, but also at the same time, I've got to learn to develop and lead the people around me on my team. It's a concept that we kind of developed through a series of workshops that can be super helpful for people. So what'smyvoice.com, you can take the free assessment. You can also pass along. You can have people on your team. They can take the assessment as well. It's totally free. You can enjoy that and share it also with people on your team.